I'm Blanca Camacho, and I'm a member of the board of directors of HOLA, the Hispanic Organization of Latin Actors. Thank you for joining us. Today we'll be visiting with Rosalba Rolón and Jorge Merced of the Pregones Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. Rosalba Rolón is the artistic director of Pregones Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, Pregones PRTT. She is a director and dramaturg specializing in the adaptation of literary and non-literary texts for stage performances with live music. The most recent productions she has created or restaged for the company include The Red Rose, Torched, and Harlem Hellfighters on a Latin Beat. She is a tenured member of the Tony Awards nominating committee and has received awards including the United States Artists Fellowship, Creative Capital Award, and the Doris Duke Artist Award. Most recently, the production of The Red Rose received the Academy Award for Best Production in the International category at the Academia de las Artes Escénicas in Madrid, an event she attended in April. So now, please join us for a look inside Pregones Puerto Rican Traveling Theater with Rosalba Rolón and Jorge Merced. Hi, Rosalba.
Saludos, Blanca, and thank you so much. Thank you, Hola, for having us for this conversation.
Well, it's wonderful. I can't wait till we have our chat. We're here today to discuss the history of the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, Pregones Theater, and how they came to be one iconic institution. So let's start with the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. Now, Rosalba, we know that the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater was founded by Latina icon of theater film, Miriam Colon. Can you tell us a little bit about her, her history, and how she came to have this idea to have this wonderful theater?
Well, it is always a privilege to talk about Miriam. It's something that's comes so natural to me, and some people know perhaps more about Miriam from her early days. When I met Miriam, she already had begun the theater, her theater company. Her dream was coming to reality, and this was in the 70s. Now, the way that she then shared with us some of those beginnings is that, she came to New York, and then she began to notice how everybody expected for audiences to leave their homes and come to the theater, come to either Broadway, and this here was not yet Broadway. The line had not crossed over 47th Street yet. But they would come to the city, they would come to the big concerts, and she kept thinking, there is such a rich history en el teatro latinoamericano de ir a las comunidades, to go places,
Y ella ya tenía una carrera increíble a ese punto, ¿no? Estaba rodeada, trabajando en Hollywood.
Bueno, cuando llega, sí, es decir, cuando ella llega con su sueño de estar en Hollywood, to be a movie actress, but just her passion for theater was just there. And she kept thinking, what if I could use some of what I'm learning to be able to put together a theater company and begin to promote the work of Puerto Rican writers. La comunidad puertorriqueña tan grande y viva en ese momento ella decía, y muchos artistas alrededor, artistas individuales, without the theater to go, to claim their own.
Right.
So she begins to think, more practically about how can I organize something, and then she had this idea of organizing a group of writers and selecting a play that people sort of knew about. What better than the Oscar and La Carreta, right? About
sí,
the
de René Márquez, sí.
René Márquez. Tenemos el libro original firmado con él aquí que le dedicó a ella. And then she said, rather to tell people, we'll come to you, we'll come to our communities, and we can spend a day together outdoors. And that's when it began.
So she started as a touring company.
Which is why it's called Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. And she has a funny story how one day someone asked her, what's the name of the theater? And she thought, oh my God, I haven't thought of a name for the theater. And she has this beautiful story. We have it on record. And she says, we're Puerto Rican, we're traveling, we're a theater. We're the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater.
Wonderful.
She has so many wonderful stories about those years. So the troupe was really, people responded to it right away, to the magic of theater in their communities, el teatro en español. Ocasionalmente, más adelante, empezó a trabajar un poco con los artistas que estaban aquí escribiendo en inglés, you know.
Sí, porque recuerdo que hizo varias obras.
Sí.
Did she always do them in English, Spanish? How did she start?
That came later. That came later.
But initially, it was all in Spanish.
Yes, that came later as a practical way to be able to really, and an acknowledgement of the fact that we had a whole generation of Puerto Rican and
born
Latino
and raised
artists
here, right?
born and raised here,
Yeah.
and she respected that, and then she began to, especially when the theater was open, she began to then alternate the performances. Whoever did a performance, the hope was that they would be fully bilingual, or they would be double cast, right?
Right.
So one night in Spanish, one night in English, and then she began that trend. It was beautiful. In the meantime, after.
And when you were speaking about the mainstream, I mean, she offered the venue for some artists to start here.
Yes.
And then go,
Yes.
as they used to say, mainstream.
Yeah.
So things like La Carreta, I believe she did it in Spanish first and then did an English version.
Yes.
And then she did Simpson Street. I mean, talking about some of the iconic productions.
Absolutely.
Simpson Street, which was done several times, written by the late Eduardo Gallardo, who then went on to do many pieces in English in other theaters in mainstream, along with someone like Oscar Colón, who also wrote in English and had his works done in other places. And she really did eventually do every single play in English and Spanish, which was amazing.
Yes, and I think that it was important because it was a statement. And also I want to acknowledge the fact that Intar was already doing plays in English also. So there was a conversation among the different directors saying there is a Spanish theater movement in the city, and yet we have to be, we have to address language in this way. Y entonces pues nada, siguió alternando lo que hacía acá con lo que hacía en Hollywood, y creando también alianzas con artistas en Hollywood que tenían los recursos para poderla ayudar. Eventualmente estaban viajando mucho y en toda la ciudad, y comenzó.
Pero en ese tiempo las giras eran solo en los 5 condados,
De
¿no?
los 5 condados, entonces a la misma vez, porque ella trabajó mucho al principio con Gilberto Saldívar, eran colegas, entonces Gilberto decía, Miriam, yo tengo esta ilusión del teatro clásico, y ella dice, pues adelante, entonces la encuentra, y empezó también, este sistema de giras se promovió entre todos los teatros, fue muy lindo, unas colaboraciones hermosas que ahora las tenemos también nuevamente. Entonces ahí, pues ella al rato empieza a sentir, y cuando yo la conozco, que pues yo era hoy, voy a conocer a Miriam Colón, yo estaba trabajando en la Asociación de Artes Hispanas part-time, y ya tenía mi sueño de hacer algo propio. Yo estaba trabajando mucho en el Teatro Dumé, que luego es el Teatro Thalía, y tenía mis sueños con otros amigos de hacer algo nuestro.
Déjame interrumpirte un momentito.
Ahí fue cuando yo la conozco a ella, en ese momento en donde yo estaba con esa inquietud.
Porque quiero saber cómo llegó de ser un teatro rodante, que así se llamaba también el Teatro Rodante puertorriqueño, y cómo llegó a tener su propia sala, un lugar permanente. ¿Cómo sucedió eso?
Sí, ella trabajaba desde su casa y tenía luego una oficina en la calle 42, entonces comenzó a sentir ese ánimo de tener un espacio donde el público pudiera venir. Y ya habían unos pequeños espacios ya que estaban surgiendo en la ciudad de teatro latino, y ella quería el suyo. Entonces decía, caramba, algo que puede estar centralizado es si lo logro hacer en el mismo Manhattan. So she begins to think about Manhattan as a center from all the counties.
Not only that Manhattan is the center, but this is in the center of the center. I mean,
Exactly.
it's el núcleo.
But let's remember that
That-
it was
that-
truly
you're right.
Hell's Kitchen.
That's right.
It was really truly Hell's Kitchen. I mean, it was a hard neighborhood.
Yeah.
A very difficult neighborhood, but things were happening right in the corner of the street. Not too many people know about it. Éramos Aponte Park. Por ejemplo, y había una comunidad latina viviendo por aquí.
Sí, que
todavía de nuevo.
Estaba aquí desde los años 40.
Yes, the Broadway line had not moved over.
Right.
But she said, well, this is the center. And then she began to scout. She began to walk around. By then she had become very close with some dear friends of her for life, like actor Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando became like her right hand, his brother, her brother, and she was like, they were very close. And she said to him, Marlon, I really want a space. And she told her, you're crazy. You're crazy, Miriam, you're crazy. You're doing Hollywood. You have a career. She said, but I really want it. And then she began to walk around, and then she saw this building. And this building was a firehouse that had been built in the 1880s.
Wow.
And it was a shell. And they were, she says that she was walking by and she saw it, and then she saw the keyhole, and she looked through the keyhole and she could see the vastness, and she saw some trucks, fire trucks, parked in here because none of this was here.
Right.
It was just an empty shell.
And it was a working firehouse?
It was a working firehouse for sure, yeah. And she says that it was gasoline smell coming out of the keyhole, she said. And then she invites Marlon to walk by, and he said, Miriam, you're crazy. But let me see how I can help. And then she finds out that this was a city-owned building.
Okay.
And then
but now, if it was a working firehouse, how did she come to get it? Were they leaving, or
because then they began to inquire, and as she tells me, Marlon Brando was, a good friend of the Mayor Lindsay, of the mayor, and
y ya estaba por cerrar, ¿no? La compañía de bomberos, ¿no?
Yes, entonces ya querían irse a otro espacio. Y estaban buscando, recuerdo que me dijo una esquina donde fuera más fácil para ellos moverse que en el medio de un bloque.
Un bloque, sí.
Era uno de los argumentos, ¿no? Entonces, pues nada, no se le hacía fácil conseguir break through the city bureaucracy. She was again, I had been here only for 5 or 6 years, and then she, at that time, I want to pause and say that she was having a really strong career, not only in Hollywood, but she was the first Puerto Rican woman to ever be a member of the Actors Studio. So she was very involved in the Actors Studio as well, and getting to know people and getting momentum.
She was breaking down doors.
She was breaking down doors and people who could help her. But she tells me that it was Marlon, and she would call him that. It was Marlon who called the mayor and asked him.
And that was Mayor Lindsay at the time?
If he could give her an appointment and to talk about the dream of having this thing and this crazy idea. And anyway, the rest is history. It took a few years of the process, and also even we have a beautiful picture of then Raul Julia got involved. Raul Julia's career was booming, and then he was present when they unveiled the drawings. There was a beautiful picture of Raul Julia, Jacqueline Kennedy, and Miriam, and that unveiling and the mayor. So it was a big moment to have this first theater like this in this area. And so that was, then the whole designing began, but it opened. I think it was 1977, 78, and I say I think because I came to one of the first performances in which none of this existed. It was just, again, an empty shell, and the stage was over there. There were risers over on this side for people to see, but
en lo que se construía el escenario,
porque
¿no?
toma años,
cómo
y
no.
lugar conseguir los fondos. Being a city-owned building, then she was able to get a long-term lease. That we still, renew every 25 years.
Well, now the wonderful thing is that en este espacio que lo construyó desde el nada, right, porque estaba vacío, she went on to do all kinds of work. She ended up having people like Rip Torn come in and do El Hombre y la Mosca, Man in the Fly, which she then took touring to Spain. So her reach was very, very, very broad, and it lasted many years. Here we are. This was she started in this building in 77, but here we are, 2024, and it's still going strong. I mean, this is still going strong. She started a training unit as well, didn't she?
Yes.
And as the saying goes, no man is an island. In this case, no woman is an island. And even though Miriam did seek help to get her dream realized, she became the person that helped others realize their dreams as well. And she collaborated with many of the iconic legends that we know here in New York City in the theater scene at that time. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, she was very generous, with the space, with the idea, and she was such a great a network builder in a way. She so for example, one of her beautiful friendships and professional alliances was with Joseph Papp, for example, the Public Theater. They became very close, and then she tells me, they would get together and she would tell him, I am discovering all this talent, Joe, and you have this space. I'm still building my space. And they began to talk about how they could help each other. And in fact, one of the most beautiful things I ever saw was when I saw the Puerto Rican obituary, the Central Park, which was a combination of what she was doing and what Joseph Papp was doing, and with their public performances, and they became very close, very good friends, and he was present very much, and she was present also in his practice in other ways.
Well, she influenced him as well. I mean, we think of Joseph Papp as such a luminary of the theater, and that he had so much power to help others. But I recall sometime, voy a decir que fue en los años 80, que Joseph Papp tuvo un festival de teatro latino down at the Shakespeare Festival Public Theater, con invitados, grupos teatrales de todo el mundo, y teatros hispanos, los de Nueva York. Incluso en esa época, HOLA producía producciones. Hicimos una presentación en el Public Theater como parte de ese festival, y eso tendría que haber sido por la influencia de Miriam.
Sí, el festival lo estaba en ese momento planificado junto con Teatro 4, que ya no existe, pero se hizo de esa manera, y sin embargo, es precisamente por esa amistad y ese intercambio constante que Miriam y Joe tenían, en donde se sentaban por largas horas, como ella me contaba, y un poco ella le despertó a él esa pasión que ya él tenía. Él era un hombre muy generoso, pero ella, toda esa información que ella le proveía, este compromiso que ella tenía, lo iluminaba a él también.
And we all benefited from that.
Y a la larga todos nos beneficiamos. Es decir que, y hay pues data, ¿no? de qué se hizo primero, qué se hizo después, pero al final del día, ellos en un café por aquí, por la esquina, dándose un vino y hablando de sus sueños cada uno, es como cada uno llegó a donde llegó.
Right.
¿No?
Now, tell me, as we wrap this up, talking about Miriam, she got a very special award, didn't she? From President...
several.
No, but the big one.
The big one.
From President
Obama.
Tell us about that award.
Yes, and that was... it was an off year that they were with the awards, and he gives the National Medal of Honor, and one of the medals goes to an arts practitioner or several arts practitioners. And then I received a call porque querían, diciéndome, necesitamos que nos ayuden ayuden a navegar una conversación muy privada con Miriam, porque es alguien que yo conocía, teníamos, ¿no? conexión con la Casa Blanca en ese momento, con el National Endowment for the Arts y todo eso. Entonces me dice, ¿cómo tú crees que ella recibiría esa noticia? Porque estas cosas que vienen de los presidentes a veces tienen tonos políticos.
Right.
Querían saber, y dije, sería para ella lo más maravilloso, pero quiero estar segura. Así que llamé a Freddy, su esposo. Y le dije, Freddy, mira, recién esta llamada de que me estábamos casi llorando. Entonces, pero no le dijimos nada, sino que yo informé que ella iba a recibir con gusto esta noticia. Y la llamaron. Entonces ella podía llevar 2 personas, así que me invitó y fuimos Freddy y yo acompañándola a la Casa Blanca a recibir el premio junto con otra gente muy linda, que Stephen King estaba en el grupo que la recibió junto con ella, estaban sentados allí. Y fue un día muy especial. Tenemos aquí la medalla en el teatro.
Ask you.
Sí,
Oh
la
my
tenemos
goodness, that's
para que
amazing.
el público la disfrute. Fue un día muy lindo y me emociona porque ellos habían invitado prensa en español, bastante, de distintas partes de Latinoamérica. Entonces le empezaron a entrevistar allí en el gran salón en español y ella empezó a llorar. Pues no podía creer que estaba haciendo una entrevista en español sentada en la Casa Blanca.
Increíble.
Entonces luego estaba en una columna cuando fuimos para la celebración, están las columnas esas que se ven en todas las fotos, y ella de pronto, Freddy me dice, me noto a Miriam, no sé, la noto sobrecogida, y vamos allá y ella dice, es que recuerdo yo de niñita con los zapatos rotos yendo a la escuela y mírame dónde estoy. Y la abrazamos y le dijimos, ahora vamos a celebrar. Entonces, pues nada, en ese momento pues vino la persona del presidente y dijo, él quiere tener una palabra privada con los honorees. Sí. Entonces ahí solamente ellos pudieron entrar allá adentro para tener un momento privado con el presidente y con su esposa. Un día maravilloso.
This is why Miriam Colón was, que en paz descanse, was and continues to be to this day an icon of not just film and theater, but of public service, right? Of social grace.
And community activism
yes,
in
exactly.
so many ways.
Yes, exactly. And we're going to continue in a little bit when we switch up, because I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the beginnings of Pregones. All right?
Thank you.
Okay. And so going forward, here you are. You're with Miriam when she's getting this amazing award. So obviously you forged a friendship. How is it that you then start Teatro Pregones? Was she instrumental in that, or how did that happen?
Well, when I began to dream about something of my own, I was, was talking about in the 70s. I was working as an actress. I had the jobs like with the Association of Hispanic Arts, for example, and I was also teaching a course at Lehman College because I was a very young adjunct professor there. To be able to meet for ends meet and be able to survive, but also I was auditioning and I was able to begin to work in the Latino theater at the moment.
Okay.
Especialmente empecé a trabajar mucho con Eberto Dumé, que fue un gran director cubano aquí en la ciudad. Y había un ambiente ya. El Teatro Rodante puertorriqueño estaba activo, Intar estaba activo, Repertorio Español estaba activo. Comenzando, ¿no? Todos sus primeros comienzos, pero además habían otros teatros, Duo Theater estaba activo, nuestro teatro.
En ese entonces, que yo recuerde, el ambiente estaba tan fértil. There was, back then, believe it or not, there was money. And so you could open a theater anywhere. Real estate wasn't what it is now. Sí. Y en un sótano que se desocupaba, hacías un teatro.
Pero también éramos atrevidos, es decir, veíamos un teatro donde nadie más lo veía.
Sí, es cierto, pero hoy día no se puede. Se puede soñar, difícil. Pero de ninguna manera.
Creo que eso me influenció, porque era como que en este sótano hay un teatro, como que en esta esquinita hay un... Entonces era un poco...
Entonces, déjame preguntarte, debido a que había un ambiente tan fértil de teatro, what made you want ¿qué te impulsó? Was it just to be a part of this theater burgeoning Latino scene per se? Or did you find that maybe there was a little space, a niche that was missing that you wanted to fill?
You know what? You don't know it until it hits you. Yo quería trabajar, y de hecho, mi primer proyecto cuando yo decido entrar to the theater scene, no fue con Teatro Latino, porque yo estaba tomando los talleres en lo que hoy es el Clemente Soto Vélez, que en ese momento se llamaba Solidaridad Humana, y había un proyecto de teatro con Elianí Cadilla, la actriz puertorriqueña, ahí, entonces, parte de ese taller estaba Nelson Tamayo, estábamos el grupo. Entonces, de ahí es que Elianí vio mi potencial, y ella como mentora me dice, voy a hacer una obra en el Ensemble Studio Theater, me gustaría que tú audicionaras, y yo no sabía ni qué era el Ensemble Studio Theater, dije pues voy, y me dieron el papel. Pero había algo que me alaba hacia lo nuestro, entonces, y era en parte por el idioma, me sentía más cómoda con el español, todo. Entonces, at that point in life, when you're saying, I'm just gonna do that, I think, I began to work with Teatro, with Mario Peña y Elizabeth Peña y el grupo Margarita Toirá, que en paz descansen los tres. Entonces tenían en un pequeño sótano tenían su teatro y el Portón.
El Portón.
Entonces comencé a trabajar allí. Ay, que fue mi primera experiencia. Si el director de la pieza, no recuerdo el nombre de la pieza, pero el director Alberto Dumé se quedó muy impresionado y contento conmigo. Entonces él estaba ya auscultando el ir a Queens a buscar un espacio, porque él decía, tenemos que salir de la ciudad. Él siempre me decía, tenemos que ir a otros lugares. And he found this space, which today we know as Thalia Spanish Theater, que era el Teatro Dumé, y él me invita a trabajar allá. Y fue con mi primera ilusión. Cuando yo era niñita, el actor puertorriqueño que yo vivía enamorada de él era Raúl Dávila. Entonces, Raúl estaba dirigiendo una pieza, y cuando él me dice, es una pieza con Raúl, yo por poco me desmayo. Y llamé a mi madre a Puerto Rico y le dije, y me dice, pero no es posible. Y audicioné y me dieron el papel. Entonces,
qué divina persona.
Ahí eran, y Zuli Montero estaba en la pieza. Pues empecé a conocer gente bella y me quedé trabajando en Dumé por 2 o 3 años. Y ahí comencé a trabajar mucho también con el gran Luis Meléndez, que en paz descanse. Luis venía de la tradición del teatro popular de calle de Puerto Rico, teatro universitario, de la tradición del teatro popular latinoamericano, y teníamos eso en común, un poco la inquietud política, la inquietud del teatro al aire libre, y yo le decía, ay Luis, tengo como que unas ganas de retomar esto del teatro callejero con los temas puertorriqueños. Empezamos a inventar, él y yo, a imaginarnos. Luego se da otra pieza en el Teatro Dumé y ahí conozco a David Cromer, entonces nos hacemos muy amigos y había una commonality of thinking, mostly political alignment along popular theater and the things that were important to the Puerto Rican community, que seguía llegando en grandes cantidades. Desconectados, quiero admitir, de lo que ya había en un movimiento newyorrican aquí, que existía también. Eso viene más adelante, que hacemos esta unidad que tenemos ahora. Entonces dije, ay, vamos a inventarnos algo. Y recuerdo que cuando las piezas abrían, antes de entrar al escenario, íbamos una hora antes a soñar sobre nuestro proyecto. Entonces, en eso, yo seguía trabajando con Association of Hispanic Arts. That's a whole different story as how I got there. But in part, it's how I got plugged into the arts full time, because I was teaching and I was having other gigs, and it's like, this is just what I want to do.
You wanted to focus all that energy, or that artistic and political and social energy.
Yeah, and through I want to credit the Association of Hispanic Arts for giving me the opportunity to then. I remember when they asked me to organize a meeting of all the artistic directors of Latino theaters at the moment, just like we're doing now with Alianza. And when they walked in, it was Max Ferran, Gilberto Saldívar, Miriam Colón. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here?
And then right.
And they said, all I had was the agenda. This is the agenda. And then I disappeared and I looked like, de ladito. Pero interestingly, And I'm just going to say this, and we can edit, but I want to say that the Association of Hispanic Arts, one of the directors was Elsa Robles and Elba Cabrera, who just passed away. And Elba Cabrera was also an activist, a Bronx activist mostly. And that's how my first steps in understanding the Bronx as a place that I...
So is that always the location you were looking at?
No.
Okay.
We just grew.
Where did you start? So where did you start?
We started
Y empezaron como
in our kitchen.
Okay, pero digo, empezaron como un teatro rodante también,
so
¿no?
this is what we did. You know, I said to Luis one day, we were in Queens doing, but when I saw what's happening in Queens, I'm thinking, why is and it reminded me of Miriam when she told me the story years later. She says, but that's what I was thinking. That's how I know the story, because she shared with me. I said, why is everybody from everywhere coming to the middle of the city, and so what about the other boroughs, and what if we were to go there, as if I was the first one to think about it. No, Miriam Colón had already thought about it, and so had done it. Entonces, cuando yo conocí a Miriam en esa reunión famosa que yo estaba temblando, que me dice, ¿tú qué haces? Y le digo lo que hacía, y me dice, ¿eres actriz? Sí, me dice, ay, un día recibo una llamada, como tú, de tele, ¿verdad? Me dice, quisiera hablarte un poco sobre algo. Y yo pensaba, ay, a lo mejor es para una producción, yo soñando. Pero voy para allá. Entonces me dice, mira, es que tengo una posición aquí abierta de marketing. And I'm wondering, y si tú tuvieras unas horas, porque lo que has hecho con con Association of Hispanic, I love what you're doing there. I wonder if you could do something like that here. Yo le dije, mira, Miriam, ay, cuánto me gustaría. Es que estoy dando una clase, estoy haciendo la obra con Dumé y tengo este sueño de crear mi compañía y estoy reuniéndome con mis amigos a ver si lo podemos hacer. Y ella me miró. Y recuerdo que tenía otra persona con ella, al lado de donde es la galería aquí. Y dice, she wants to have her own theater. Y yo, oh my God, she's going to laugh at my face. She looked at me and she said, that's what you need to concentrate on.
Wow.
Thank you for coming. I'm here if you need me. And that was all. Nada de que te veo mañana, nada. Sí. It was like, pero se puso de pronto así, yo, sí,
okay. Sin saber lo que venía por delante.
Like, okay.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember that day I heard stomping up on the 4th floor, and I said, what is that? She says, it's the class, the training unit class, and the director, Alvan Colón, is there. And so I didn't know Alvan. I met him later. Then we became close. We got married 40 years now. But most importantly, at that moment, was that he became part of the company.
Wonderful. And so now,
but I'm saying all this because it's all you don't think about it ahead of time. Mm-hmm. It just comes to you when you least expect it. Mm-hmm. When you turn a corner and
an opportunity opens up, right?
and it happens.
The moment.
And sometimes if the opportunity is not there, but if you see the potential, you just kick that door open, right. And then you say, "I'm going for it." So when I talked to I was talking to Luis and David at that time in 77, 78. I said, what I envision, yo de malcriada, is what if we put together like every single theater play that has been written in Puerto Rico ever? And Luis looked at me like all 500 of them or 1,000? I said, I don't know, I'm just saying. And so we began to flirt with the idea of researching 100 years of Puerto Rican theater. Mm-hmm. What if we take the most salient ones from each decade and put them all together? I said, we still would be like 5 years of ongoing. And what if we take the most salient one of each decade? And that was 10 plays. I'm going to produce 10 plays. What if we take the climatic scene of each play and we put it all together?
So
and
even
that's when our first
you were doing an original piece, right?
La Colección. It was the climatic piece of every single piece written between 1868 and 1878 and 1978, 100 years of Puerto Rican history, the climatic scene of the most salient play of each decade.
Amazing. So now,
and that's how we began to put it all together.
And so you took this touring as a touring production?
The idea was to do it in a way that would tour inspired by the Latin American popular theater movement.
But now, where did you first produce that play?
So what we did is that once we did the research and we began to gather people around us, how we could do it, and and I began to make adaptations. That's when I discovered my passion for adaptations. And David would be working on one thing, and Luis would be working on something else. And then we identified. I remember Socorro Santiago I said, Socorro, come and read with us, and other actresses that were coming up. This is just an idea. Right. We would be in my living room, reading.
So where did you first perform it?
So what we did is we first did actual reading. There were like 4 or 5 of us, and we invaded a theater illegally.
Did you have an audience?
Oh my goodness, did we have an audience? It was full. This is what happened. The custodian of this off-Broadway theater that I will die
never
with
divulge,
a secret.
of course
never
not.
Until yes, it would be my tombstone or something.
Yeah.
The custodian was the boyfriend of one of our 2 actors.
That's convenient. That's
and
convenient.
He said, on Monday nights, nothing is there. No one is there. It's closed. It's closed. It's closed. Let's just do it there. Let's just do the reading there. And so we asked Brenda Feliciano, the amazing singer, to sing some pregones. Pregones, a cappella. And then we recorded it. And then I called, said, Miriam, we're ready to do this. The problem is that nobody can know that we're there. And she said, I love that. Because she was such a rebel.
Right.
And so Emilio Carballido, the incredible padre de Mexican theater, was in town. She said, I'm going to call Emilio. And then we began to call people, and we had the place had about 100 people. It was full of people who knew that they should not be there.
Right.
And then I remember Miriam brought up una bolsita con vino. Me said, just in case I have to run, I have it already packing here. And so we had a reception with I can't believe I still
Y así
cannot.
fueron los inicios del teatro Pregones.
But most importantly, that was a day when we had the beautiful reading. It went well. We got very good feedback from the audience. It was almost the first seats of what we call today microteatro, because these were like micro scenes.
Right.
And that's when we began what we call aesthetically, we baptized it as the collection theater, teatro de colección, de coleccionar muchas cosas en una sola pieza. And then, and the talkback at the end, Emilio Carballido said, oh my gosh, he's going to tell us how wonderful we are. And then he said, me gustó muchísimo, colegas, esta pieza, pero tengo una crítica. Ustedes los puertorriqueños que le sacan ruido a una palangana dándole con un tubo, ¿cómo se atreven a tener música grabada? Sí, maestro. Tienen que tener un músico con ustedes en escena. Sí, maestro.
Pero qué inspiración, ¿no? Para el futuro de este teatro.
Y cuando lo vimos luego, muchos años después, que le dije, y él decía, pues por supuesto, ni siquiera se dio crédito, pues por supuesto que lo iban a hacer. Pero le dije, pero fue usted. Pero él no aceptó el crédito. De todas maneras, es la vida que te enseña cosas. Yo compartí esta experiencia con gente, con unos estudiantes, y me dijeron, ¿y si algo le pasara a usted? Y dije, es que si surge algo tan bello como lo que tenemos que tomar el riesgo. Pero a un poco también cuando no hay eso, como en ocasiones no la hay, como le digo yo a algunos estudiantes, si tú tienes algo que decir, tienes una persona que te escucha, te paras frente a un árbol de escenografía y ya comenzaste tu proceso. Y yo creo que eso fue lo que nos dijo a nosotros, háganlo. Ya Miriam lo hizo en una ocasión, pero we never thought of having a space.
Right.
We said we only want to be a touring company. That was our mission. That was our goal, and we began to explore and create work.
And so for years you were a touring company. Was it just around the boroughs of New York, or did you also go out?
We began to go out. What happened is that we invited a director to direct one of our pieces, and Víctor Fragoso, también que en paz descanse. Él enseñaba en Princeton College y dijo, vamos a Princeton. And then we go to Princeton and we thought, oh my God. And then the organizers in the university were students, Latino students que estaban organizando. Little did I know that they had done the same thing a few years before for the touring production from the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater to go to Princeton.
Okay.
Porque Sonia Sotomayor estudiaba allí.
Oh my goodness.
Y ella y los estudiantes organizaron la primera visita de un teatro a Princeton, de un teatro latino. Cuando fuimos, de ahí surgieron otras invitaciones a otras universidades, and Blanca. Between 1979 and 1985, we had toured most of the country and several countries. we were going
¿Cuántos
from
países?
place.
¿Cuántas ciudades? ¿Cuántos estados?
We were traveling a good 180 to 200 days a year. Within the city.
Right.
And abroad, and in other states and cities and abroad, and we haven't stopped. We still tour, but this is the thing. No era a grandes teatros, era a salitas, era aquí en Nueva York, en el lobby de un edificio, de un proyecto, era en una esquina de un parque.
Traerlo al pueblo.
Era eso, era donde sea. Entonces, traigo a Elba Cabrera de nuevo because her sister, Evelina Antonetti, was one of the most important activists in the history of the borough of the Bronx. And she had founded United Bronx Parents. And she has said, come and do the workshops of how you're creating your work. And then she basically just put us there like, we need you. And we still were sort of separated from our other side of the mirror, another side of me, the Nuyorican me, right? The Nuyorican community. She said, there's stuff, we need to get together, we need to figure out a way to merge this idea of what you're doing and what the poets in the streets of the Bronx are doing. And so she said, and we had, worked a lot there, but she said, I have a desk. Do you need a desk? How about if that desk becomes Fregones' desk? I said, we have a desk.
We have a desk.
We have a desk.
Tenemos un lugar.
Sí. Y luego nos dio un teléfono y contestábamos, Teatro Pregones, buenas tardes. Pero
entonces, fue por azar que entonces llegaron a estar en el Bronx, porque ustedes se han ubicado en el Bronx,
¿no?
In
terms of the local work, 80% of our time was working with various community organizations and churches and, everywhere, but especially in the Bronx. And in Manhattan, when we were there, and Teatro Cuatro had the theater at 104th Street in el barrio del Bronx, eran nuestros hubs, much more than other parts of the city.
So how did you end up permanently in the Bronx?
Well, what happens is that we had been working for so long there that Villa Maguado was the president of the Bronx Council on the Arts, and we had gotten to be friends and know each other. They said, you need more than a desk. Yeah, I mean, we love what you have, but you need a space. We're always searching for spaces to rehearse. But we have so many good contacts and so many good relationships that people say, come to the community center. And he said, but you need like a more formal space. This was 1980, like 6 years into our life. And so the Bronx Council on the Arts had just worked to open the Longwood, an abandoned school or an old school in Longwood Avenue in the Bronx. And they had basically taken over the school and created galleries and offices for artists and artist studios. It was beautiful, pretty much like what the Clemente Clemente Center is that we know of. Something very similar, but in Longwood, and then they gave us a very, very low, a few pennies a month, a whole what used to be a classroom, but now we put a couple of desks on the corner to be practical, and then we had a whole classroom, which was pretty big for rehearsals, which we never...
So one corner for administrative work, and then one for artistic.
Yes, and we would just rehearse, and I remember that we were across from another building, and people would see us, and we would see people inside their homes watching through our windows, and we would just wave. And it was such a good feeling, but we were still touring, never thinking we're going to have our own space, but by then we were working pretty consistently with an Episcopalian church, St. Margaret, and we did a couple of performances there.
And so ultimately you end up moving several times in the Bronx until you get to where you are now.
Today. But and perhaps if I may, the first big one was when Father Roberto Morales, the rector of that church, said, I'm moving over to St. Anne's Church, which is a historic church on 138th Street in Mott Haven. And there is this gym there that we don't have a use for. Now, Father Roberto Morales was a retired professional basketball player. And I said, but don't you want to do like, he says, no, because I'm going to create a summer program outdoors for players. So if you want to rehearse there, I said, oh, sure. It's a whole gym, and we could rehearse. And then we began to dream about what if there was a stage there? What if that we bring in 100 seats? What if? And he was there, supporting the idea of finally we don't have to be hunting for a place to rehearse. And maybe
No
we
estar
can,
ambulante, aunque
Sí,
eran rodante, no estar
but to have
ambulante.
an anchor. But
Sí.
also he said, for the first time we thought, what if we brought audiences to us? And we said no. We felt that we were betraying our mission.
right.
Like, no, we're supposed to be on the
Llevamos el
streets.
teatro a ellos,
And
no
they
ellos
said,
acá.
but we have to also find a place where people can find us. Because I
Right.
remember Dolores Prida saying once into a theater, well, it's hard to catch them at the theater in the city, but, and there was no internet. You need to really...
Word of
so
mouth,
we said, there's
right.
a way in which we can do this. And Miriam said, you know what, it makes sense that you have like some permanence and you continue to travel. And then word got out that we were opening this space. They got out to a place called Hudson Scenic Studios. Hudson Scenic Studios is one of the major set designers and construction companies on Broadway. And their shop was about 5 blocks away from us in the Bronx. People didn't know that we were in the South. So we got actually knocked on our door one day and said, we heard that you're doing this.
No.
I said, okay, because we have all these sets and all
No,
these things.
that's
that
incredible.
because every certain amount of years or months, I don't know
Right.
what the schedule is, they need to refresh the
Right.
sets from
Right.
Broadway show. They were refreshing the sets of Cats.
Oh my goodness.
And they said, we have all these curtains and we have all these things from Cats. If you want them, said, I'm thinking, how much is going to cost us to do all
Right,
that? I
right.
said, nothing. We'll bring you here because it's more expensive for us.
Tenían que deshacerse de eso de todos modos.
That's what we
amazing.
heard, that there was a cemetery of sets in
Right,
somewhere in
right.
Queens where they go and they burn the sets. And one day we see this huge trailer coming and park there. Are you ready? They said. And they had the people, they had the workers, they built a set. I mean, they built the stage, they built the risers, they built us a theater.
That's unbelievable. No, yo no sabía ese cuento.
Yes.
That's incredible.
We will always be grateful to Hudson Scenic Studios. And
That's-
so
now you have a
And
theater.
they continue to be a part of the family.
Right.
And now we had a theater.
And you were bringing
And then
audiences to you.
But then we're touring. I said, we have the
Right.
theater empty half
Right,
of the
right.
time. I said, what if we bring other artists to use the space while we're traveling? And little by little, slowly, the National Performance Network was being developed with several venues. And we said, we would like to be part of that. And that's when, for the first time ever, and ever since, our mission changed from being an ensemble that produces our work to also a presenter. And that's when the presenter phrase was being coined, the name presenter, the title, and we became both a producer and a presenter. And we began, and we did our first theater festival there, inspired by the Latin American theater festivals everywhere.
That's
we said,
amazing.
okay, and we began to bring in we brought Julia Shkani, and we brought all the theater from Puerto Rico and from other states as well. By then, we already had. Our company was very mixed of the Puerto Rican born and the New Ricans, and it was just a fully beautiful.
So now you've become an
configuration.
established place. Like you
And
have a
it's-
theater, you
Yes.
travel, you can actually invite other artists.
Yes.
You're sharing your wealth, basically,
Yes.
the
Yes.
wealth of
Yes.
someone parking
Yes.
a truck and
we were-
building a
yeah.
theater.
So
So
we
now,
actually honor Miriam on our first festival.
okay,
Yes,
perfect.
She was our first honoree.
So now let me move forward to how do the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater and Pregones become one entity? Because both were artistic icons already individually on their own in New York. Both had their own theaters, both had their built-in audiences, quite successful. So how is it that you decide, or how does it come about that these two entities become one, what it is now, Pregones Puerto Rican Traveling Theater?
Now we have a beautiful building from St. Anne's. We kept going until we purchased our own property and developed a beautiful building that we have on Walton Avenue in the Bronx.
Right.
And then throughout that whole process, Miriam had been a friend. Miriam had been talking to us about ideas for the future. And life takes over in many ways. And she was beginning to see the future of the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. We were talking about, what's going to happen. Today we call it succession, and we have a word for it. But at that time is how are we going to move our both theaters together? And we began to talk about doing some joint programming, and that's when we began to sort of rehearse working together, not with the idea of merging.
Was it either one of you? I mean, whose idea was that? I mean, it just happened organically?
It happened organically. I can't even think that it was just one person. We just kept doing more and more things together over the 90s and the end of the 90s and towards the early 2000s and doing co-productions, and I helped organize the production here. And until we said, this is happening so often, and we're like one, and we began to talk about what if we were to down the line program together permanently at some point, thinking of a strategic alliance and not of a merger. But as time went on, and she began to feel, her life needed a certain pace, and
right, because by this time she had been working nonstop for decades.
Nonstop for decades, and
I remember all theater, film, TV. I mean, yeah.
And we said, maybe we need help to figure this out. Our team was amazing, and Arnaldo and Jorge and Alva and everyone working together. How can we do this so that it's really what it should be, permanently? And then one day we just sat there, and I remember we had a facilitator that we had brought in to help us figure it out. And she said, "How does the word merger land with the two of you?" We're like, "Merger," She said, "I don't know. We just want to get married."
Right. And I was just thinking about that. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, you don't, usually bring in someone just to get married. Right. Exactly. You'd been dating, and so now, right.
And I remember Barbara said, "Well, institutionally, that is called a merger." And we looked at each other. I said, "So are we one?" And all I know is that she put like a ring, like a wedding ring in the middle of the table.
No.
And she said, "Josie, you both reach it." I reached one end of the ring and Miriam reached the other end, and I said, "Are we one?" We're one.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was something that had been sort of organically.
After that we began to practice with the word merger.
Right.
But I can say that we were talking about this for about 10 years.
So now let me ask you, how long had you merged before you ended up with the entire theater? Because Miriam passed, unfortunately, and so you ended up being the artistic director, but how long had you already been merged that time?
We had been working together and programming together for about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And not very actively, just as we were passionate about a project, and we were working on another project together that we wanted to do. When she said, "I really cannot, I need to pause," and at that time, we because the word merger wasn't there, we began then to talk about being very practical about the staff, and so Arnaldo, our managing director, was working a few hours here. We began to realize that it was not practical to keep it like that we needed to intentionally structure differently, and that's why I think we were
in other words, were you duplicating positions in both areas?
In a way, and so we said, we should move with it, and we had a very good friend, a lawyer that was friend to both. He said, "Let's move with it. Let's move with this legally. Let's just make sure that everyone is happy with the idea of turning it into one. How do we do both names?" And we thought the name was so long, but we wanted to keep, he said, "Do we find a new name that's kind of too trendy? This is who we are. We're Pregones and we're Puerto Rican Traveling Theater." And so one day we said, let's just do it. And we sat down, and then John came in, the lawyer came in with the papers.
Let me just ask you, but at what point now do you end up with...
This was closer to 2000, between 2013 and 2015. She had already asked me to make these decisions, which I don't do alone. We have an artistic team, Jorge Merced and Alban Colon, myself, and with Arnaldo as the lead managing person in the organization, and our board. We said, now we have to assume this responsibility, and
that was because Miriam had said,
she was happy, she was comfortable with the idea. Right. We had also Freddie, her husband, at the table with us, saying we're ready for this. And from then on, we we planned together at least the first 2 or 3 seasons. And then she would come and visit, but it was really, by 2015, we were really fully.
And she
in
passed, I think, was it
charge.
2017?
17,
Right.
yeah. And then that's when the medal in the 2015 was it? Yeah, and all of the things, all these recognitions.
So now
began.
now you have this theater.
So,
now you
yeah.
have two theaters
Two
under one
venues, yeah, two
organization.
theaters, yeah.
So now, how do you reconcile at that point, right? Let's say the mission statements of each one, and do you sort of just look at it because you had already had so much in common in terms of what you were doing and the works you were producing? Was it relatively easy to say, well, now I just have two spaces, but the mission is still the same?
The mission we wish we talked about together, expanded to make sure that under the banner. Two stages and one theater. We
Beautiful,
so
right.
We began to program together. Not concurrently, but consecutively, because we didn't have
One in each.
Yes.
So not competitively, right? Yeah.
Competitively. Also, we were learning the ropes
Right,
of
right,
having two venues,
right.
going to one, doing
Sure.
alternating.
Right, right.
And so we would do sequential programming. When we finished something in the Bronx, we came here.
Right.
A little. We're still doing it a little
And
bit.
how do
like
you,
that.
how at this point do you decide which venue, any particular production is going to take place?
It is, those things come to you naturally in the creative process. We're saying, this I see here, or this I see over there. We did, however, by then, remember, the Broadway line had crossed. This was now no longer that place of 30 years ago. This was like the
right on
Latino
the foot,
theater
right.
on the Broadway district.
Right.
And we're saying we don't want to sabotage ourselves thinking every
Right.
big production needs to be there.
Right.
Because we have our Bronx venue as another
Right.
destination. So we began to balance out what is it that we're doing here. Aesthetically, even some of these was about aesthetics.
Right,
what
because
is
the
the
theaters
best
are very
fit?
different.
Exactly,
Yes.
very different theaters.
Right.
So the aesthetics pretty much determine still to this day what should live here and what should live over there.
Right.
And so we also have open to presenting also programming here, and with our partners that or the programming. So for the past 10 years we've been just basic balancing this out. We learn every day. We continue to travel, not as much, but we continue with
You
our
do
engagement.
continue, right.
Yeah, we continue with our engagements with our friends and partners in other parts of the country and of the world, and we were. And that continues now,
I want to ask you about the creative process, because my understanding is, and from the things that I've seen, that you do pretty much just all original work, or perhaps an adaptation of something.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That is correct. We have done some canon work as
Right.
well over the years, but mostly has been, which is how we started. Original works, things that we create ourselves. We have a full-time musical director.
And
that
I was going to
who is a
say,
composer.
are all the pieces musicals or
Mostly.
with music?
Mostly
Okay,
musical,
so-
or with a sound of rich sound environment. It could be, not
Right.
necessarily. But for that, we do have our composer who has been with us for 30 years.
Because I would love for you, Rosalba, to share how the creative process happens for this theater. I was lucky enough. A few years ago, there was the Latino Theater Commons, and they travel around convening with Latino artists once a year to just share ideas. And one year it was in New York, and you would go to the different venues to have different experiences, whether it was to watch shows, and in the afternoon and during the day, you would take workshops with the different ones just to get to know them. And I took a workshop with Rosalba and her team, and they shared how they create their productions. It was fascinating, and I was hoping if you could sort of summarize and share how that collaborative experience is between director, between the creators, the cast, the musicians. They create it all collaboratively. Please tell us how you do that.
Yeah, very quickly, and just to say that each of us, like Jorge has his own style, I have my own style, but the root of it is that we conceive ourselves, we are a company. We grew up as an ensemble with meaning shared responsibilities with levels of autonomy and levels of authority. So if, for example, we have, an idea and we bring it to a table, we do improvisation. Sometimes the idea is already drafted, for example, an adaptation. I want to read this, and then we go for it through movement, through music or composition, through improvisation. For example, if we're not sure of the type of music that we're going to be doing, then we have sessions after session with our composer just exploring. For example, Torched, which we showed here, that's an example of how we continue to work with the cast to be able to improvise so that we can catch that sound and that spirit, and then the smart can begin the compositions. Now, granted, we're very serious about crediting the creator, so that you'll see that it usually says Rosalba Rolón with Pregones Theater or with the ensemble, because I always think that we cannot do it without the contributions of the cast members. So there is that, the workshops, which we call Theater in Motion, is when we divide a group of people into sections, and you're going to work with the music, you're going to work with the body, you're going to work with the text. Let's bring it all together and let's figure it out. At the end of the day, do I step back, or Jorge steps back and say, this is how it's going to be moving? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's more structural, more conventional, but when we get stuck, we go back to the root of improvisation and breaking through what we perceive is right. That we always, most of the time, work with live musicians on stage, with musicians, and we're very respectful of the role of the musicians. We always tell the actors, the musicians are not working for you, and you're not working for the musicians, we're working together. And the most beautiful moments are when an actor is saying, I feel like my heart is beating, and the musician says, can I give you a sound for the heartbeat?
Oh my goodness.
And they begin, and that happened also in our most recent production, and then begins the heartbeat and the sound, and before you know it, I say, it's a take.
That's it.
You know, that's it. And so it's about keeping the creativity flowing, because I'm not the only one there who has an idea.
Right, and that's such a unique take from someone who is like the director, the artistic director, where it is like we are all artists, starting with that premise, right? We're all artists. You may be a musician, dancer, choreographer, whatever, and we all share ideas to create this one piece. And that's what I just found. The spirit of cooperation and of camaraderie, and it was just within like a 2 or 3 hours that I took this thing. But it was so palpable. It was very impressive. And I just have to say, no wonder you have been prized and acclaimed and applauded by so many entities. I mean, I don't know how many HOLA awards you've gotten. You also recently were given an award. Tell us about that one, the Red Rose, which was awarded not just here but in Spain. Tell us about that.
Sí, fue la Academia de las Artes Escénicas de España. Abrió sus premiaciones a proyectos internacionales, en este caso en la ciudad de Nueva York, por proyectos latinos hechos por instituciones latinas. Entonces tuvimos la gran suerte de ser nominados junto con otros compañeros también para las Rosas Rojas, y pues ganamos el premio en la premiación, los premios Thalía en Madrid, que se dieron en abril. Entonces fuimos para allá, y allá estábamos con nuestros colegas de acá de Nueva York, con repertorio español también, que fue nominado. Y nada, ganamos este premio que tan hermoso que todavía no lo podemos ni creer, y ahora la pieza ha sido invitada
y creo que es solo el segundo año, que se otorgan estos premios. Exacto. ¿No? Y ustedes fueron los ganadores con una obra que tiene una historia, ¿no? Porque se ha presentado más de una vez aquí en Nueva York.
Fue la obra con que abrimos nuestro teatro. En el Bronx. Luego la presentamos acá, la presentamos entonces, y en Madrid tuvimos el premio. En Puerto Rico lo hemos presentado también, y ahora va para el festival, el encuentro de Festival de Latin American Theater Centers en Los Ángeles.
Magnífico.
Y vamos para allá, vamos a hacer una de las obras inaugurales del festival.
Perfecto. Sí. Entonces quiero hablarte también, porque mencioné HOLA, the Hispanic Organization of Latin Actors, y ustedes se han llevado yo no sé cuántos premios con HOLA.
Muy agradecidos.
Cuéntanos un poco de la relación que tiene el Teatro Pregones Puertorriqueño Traveling Theater con HOLA tras los años.
Bueno, sí, mira, pues HOLA por supuesto ha tenido su propia trayectoria, ¿no? Y ha tenido sus momentos en que ha incluso ha pausado en algunos momentos y renace, y ahora estamos viendo un renacer muy lindo de HOLA, pero sí recuerdo cuando empezó era ese grupo de gente que nos protegía, que nos ayudaba, y Miriam era muy cercana y habían ganado varios premios. La primera vez que nos nominaron fue hace mucho tiempo. Fue en Rincón Taíno, precisamente, ahora que lo pienso, que hubo la actividad, entonces, y la tertulia.
Sí.
También cuando surge la tertulia. Entonces, HOLA fue fundamental. Para mí, en lo personal, te puedo decir algo muy importante. HOLA realmente, aparte de su misión, teníamos unos compañeros que empezaron a recibir informes de muchos de nosotros y nosotras sobre situaciones que estaban sucediendo en el mundo, aquí en Mainstream, en las audiciones, en donde había acoso sexual, había situaciones difíciles.
Pero estás hablando cuando dices en el mainstream, aparte del teatro hispano.
Aparte del teatro hispano.
Okay.
Y lo voy a ligar con algo muy interesante.
Sí.
Y recuerdo que yo tuve varias experiencias como esa. Las muchachas latinas eran las que ellos pensaban que podían hacer cualquier tontería, ¿no? Entonces fui a esta audición en un 9º piso, allí frente a las Naciones Unidas, en un sitio muy lujoso. Entonces el que me está audicionando me pide que me suba la falda, y yo, pero ¿cómo va a ser el vestuario? Es una enfermera. El vestuario es que va a ser una falda corta. Y yo me subí la falda, tú estás ahí, pues. Entonces súbetela un poquito más, y yo me lo miro. Entonces él dice, voy a ir al baño. Y yo miré eso y vi la puerta, y fui a la puerta, la abrí y corrí por esas 9 escaleras para abajo, for my life. Entonces llegué llorando a mi apartamento, llorando. Entonces, esa tarde tenía otra audición. Voy a esa otra audición, que era una comedia de algo. Y me dicen, no tenía nada que ver, no era para bailar ni nada, pero entonces cuando me ven, me dicen, pero para audicionar tienes que treparte en esa mesa y bailar. Y dije,
¿El mismo día?
El mismo día por la tarde. Entonces, al otro día por la tarde, perdón.
Okay.
Entonces, entonces yo dije, pues déjeme ir a prepararme al baño, y por ahí salí corriendo. Entonces ya no sabía qué hacer, y me encuentro con Manny un día, con un representante de HOLA, sí. Entonces le digo, ay, Manny, lo que me ha pasado, y él me dice, no eres la primera que me dice esto, vamos a hacer algo. Y él reúne la directiva de HOLA, se deciden reunir con Backstage, la revista Backstage, que era siendo publicada, y Backstage corre la primera historia.
No me digas.
Gracias a que HOLA intervino y dijo, esto está pasando con nuestra juventud latina, que ven una muchacha latina. Mucho también pasaba con los muchachos gay en el momento, y ellos hicieron la primera denuncia pública.
Oye,
sobre esto.
Nunca había oído esto.
Yo quiero dar así, agradecida 40 años más tarde por eso, porque le decían unas otras tonterías como, roll your R, are you latina?
Sí.
Y es like, oh my God.
Right.
You know, entonces...
Pero esas son boberías, pero acoso sexual es otra cosa.
Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Eso coincide con la llegada a Nueva York de Sud, Luis Valdés, Teatro Campesino. Y nos invitan a audicionar, y yo, ay, Dios mío, ahora vienen con lo mismo y nos van a hacer lo mismo. Y yo iba a bailar, yo también era bailarina en ese momento. Y cuando yo entro a aquel lugar, y eran Luis Valdés y todos latinos, y ellos con ese respeto y esa delicadeza, yo decía, es posible respetar a una mujer en una audición, porque ellos nos respetaron.
Bueno, Rosalba, hemos hablado del historial de ambos teatros, de la nueva organización que tenemos, y ahora quiero preguntarle, what's in the future?
Oh, the future is beautiful, is bright. We have built a great infrastructure that can carry us forward. A great team. The team approach has been, we're totally committed to that. So our artistic team, is very, very actively looking into the future, looking into a new generation. But, as we move forward, our programming is split between all of us, and we have our own styles and aesthetics that we bring to the table. So we have Jorge Merced, who I told you how he came in one day, you know, in 1987, I think it was, or 88, and he's there with his own legacy within the organization, and so is Alvan, and so is Desmar, our composer. So we have a body of work and already to speak for, but also a lot more to be discovered, and that's what we're hoping for. Looking into the next 40 years.
Well, I wish you much success, the best of luck. Thank you for bringing us the joys of our own theater, of our own legacy, of our own history, of our own culture. Thank you for making sure over all these years that was something that we could enjoy and partake of. I thank you so much. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you very much.